Welcome to my presentation entitled The Effect of Distractions on a Student with ADHD. Let's first investigate what ADHD is and how it's affecting the population of current students. ADHD, or Attention Deficit Hyperactivity Disorder, is a neurological disorder in which a person exhibits inattentiveness, overactivity, impulsivity, or a combination of the three for an extended period of time. The American Psychological Association, using the DMS-4 index, indicates that these symptoms should be apparent for at least about 6 months before a diagnosis can be made. Based on a 2007 study, in the United States, about 9.5% of children ages 4 to 17 have been diagnosed with ADHD. In Maryland, that number is a little bit higher at around 11.9%. The student that I tutored, we'll call her Sammy, attends a high school in Howard County. She was diagnosed with ADHD in 2006 when she was about 10 years old. During the first tutoring session, as we worked on Sammy's homework, I realized that there were a lot of distractions in the environment that we were finishing her homework. I wanted to investigate more as to exactly what kind of distractions were bothering Sammy the most. And from this first tutoring session came my research question. What effect do various types of distractions have on a student with ADHD? By taking a look at exactly what kind of distractions affect Sammy the most, it will not only help her at home finishing her homework, but it could also be used by teachers in the schools to help her finish her tests and stay focused. As ADHD has been diagnosed more and more over the past few decades, there have been several studies to investigate how distractions affect students with ADHD. Let's take a look at a few now. In 2009, Rebecca Adams conducted a study in which 17 ADHD students and 16 non-ADHD students took tests and carried out tasks in a virtual reality setting. This virtual reality setting was to make sure that the distractions were consistent in both groups. Though there were a variety of tests, on average the ADHD students scored about a 72.8%, while the control group scored about a 93.9%. A study by Emmanuel Tarash in 2006 studied 167 students, 31 with ADHD and 136 without ADHD, on their visual motor skills. The students were asked to carry out certain tasks or answer certain questions based on prompts on a screen. Occasionally on the screen were certain distractions such as a blinking purple light or a small purple streak that went across the page. As expected, the distractions affected the ADHD group much more than the control group. The control group scored on average about a 92.3% compared with the average ADHD score of about 46%. Perhaps one of the most interesting studies I came across was a study by Howard Abacoff that took place in 1996. He wanted to study the effects of music on arithmetic performance of ADHD students. What he found was that the ADHD students did better listening to music than the control group did in this particular area. The control group scored on average an 82%, while the ADHD group scored about an 83%. Because I was mainly tutoring Sammy in math, I wanted to see if music would also help her test scores. Now we'll take a look at the experiment that I conducted with Sammy. Using the chapter that Sammy was studying in class, I gave her 4 quizzes from a different section within that chapter. During each quiz, there was one distraction present that I had planned in order to investigate its effects on Sammy as she took the quiz. It's also important to note that this was a blind study. Sammy did not know that I had planned these distractions. One of the quizzes, of course, was a control in which there were no distractions present that I had planned. During the other 3 quizzes, however, there was one planned distraction present. During the first quiz, Sammy was allowed to be on her cell phone. During the next quiz, there was an episode of Glee on television in the next room. And on the final quiz, there was music playing through her computer. Here's how a typical session would work. I would help Sammy with about 45 to 60 minutes of her homework, in which she could ask me any questions that she wanted. Immediately afterwards, I would give her a quiz on what she had just learned. During this time, she could not ask me any questions. After administering 4 different quizzes with Sammy on 4 different occasions, here are the results and analysis of each quiz that Sammy took. At the bottom of the graph, each quiz is labeled with its distraction. For example, on quiz 1, you can see the word phone. That was the one where Sammy was able to use her cell phone. On quiz 2, TV, quiz 3 was nothing, and then on the final quiz 4 was the music distraction. In most schools, a 60% is passing, so I drew that red line on the 60% mark. It's interesting to note that on quizzes 1 and 2, Sammy scored well below the passing score. On quizzes 3 and 4, she was above it. As one might expect in a student with ADHD, Sammy scored the highest on the quiz where no distractions were present. In second was the quiz where Sammy was allowed to listen to music. In third, with a score of about 50%, was the quiz where Sammy was allowed to be on her cell phone. And then finally, with a score of 41%, was the quiz where the TV show Glee was playing in the next room. Sometimes the overall score of the quiz doesn't give enough detail as to exactly how the student performed on the quiz. Using Bloom's taxonomy of learning domains, I divided each quiz into 3 parts. This would help by letting us investigate exactly what type of thinking was affected by each distraction. Here you can see that simple remembering of certain formulas and certain laws were quite high under every distraction. In fact, it was over the passing score in every single quiz. Next on Bloom's taxonomy scale was applying and analyzing. I grouped them together because you could see this mostly in the forms of calculations. While these scores were not as high as the remembering questions, 3 out of the 4 of the quizzes were still above the passing score. Finally, on the questions that required evaluating or synthesizing, you can see that Sammy scored above a passing score on only 1 of the quizzes. In fact, it was the quiz that was a control in which there were no distractions present. Let's take a look at a couple interesting points and then wrap up with a few conclusions. Similar to the study that Abakoff conducted in 1996, in which music actually helped ADHD students on certain arithmetic operations, Sammy's score on the music distraction was quite high compared to the other distractions. It's actually interesting to take a look at the results of Tarash's study, in which the non-ADHD students scored about a 92.3% versus the 46% score of the ADHD students. Sammy's results on a quiz with no distractions, she scored an 82% versus the 41% with the visual distraction. Taking a look back, it's actually hard to call the music portion a distraction when it actually seemed to keep Sammy on track. The cell phone and TV distractions obviously are very harmful to any student as she completes her work, quiz or homework, so those should be kept to a minimum. If I were to do this study again, I would like to use a larger sample size, just to increase the data's reliability. I would also like to make it a double-blind study to help eliminate bias. This made me wonder about how music could affect not only ADHD students when they completed homework and quizzes, but non-ADHD students as well. Students are often told to sit in quiet or work in silence. But in a society that's growing with laptops, tablets, and smartphones, perhaps there's another method to help students of all abilities stay focused and increase productivity in their classes. Further investigation in this area would help examine the possibilities of helping ADHD students with something other than medication. Thank you for taking the time to listen to my presentation, The Effect of Distractions on a Student with ADHD. Hopefully this research plus previous literature will inspire others to conduct similar experiments in this area. And hopefully it will be a guide for parents and teachers to help their child or student with ADHD to increase their productivity and efficiency.